Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and welcome to Chasing Legends. Welcome back. I'm Wayne Tuttle. I'll be your host even once again. Welcome to 2021. Before we get any further, please hit subscribe, catch the notification bell, leave a comment if you like. Go on over to our About page and you can kind of see the Dutch Hunter Rendezvous and the Legend Superstition Mountain t-shirts. Pick one up. Available in black and gray, short and long sleeve. See, I got that down like nothing anymore. This week, going into the new year, we'll talk about probably leaving 2020 behind us. We'll start it out right by talking about probably one of the worst trips I ever made into the Superstitions. And this would we're probably looking somewhere, I had to be around 14, so we're gonna putting an age and date on it and all. I'd say it was probably about 78, 79. So we were going back in, not one of my favorite trips right off the bat. We were going in with horses, and I was never a big fan because once you bring the horses, there's a lot to carry on and deal with the horses being there and limits time. But for some reason, it was decided to be a packing trip and everybody rode in. We started out, I think it was April, it was a spring. We thought we were going to have really good weather, and it started out fine. We went in down by the Peralta Trailhead area. We're going to swing around, go down by Miner's Needle, work our way up, and the idea was to go up into Charlebois, up LaBarge and into Charlebois. And we're supposed to stay there 2 or 3 days and then come back out. And I think it was more of just kind of a unique, different kind of trip. I'm not sure. I was at an age at that point. I wasn't always sure exactly what the point of the trip always was. So I remember going back in. This is during those formative years where I'm really still kind of getting into the mountains, and I haven't quite been totally turned loose, but I'm literally at the age where I'm starting to wander off more and more by myself when we go back in. And we started heading in, and I remember once we came around and we're going up, and anybody knows the switchbacks going up through Miner's Needle and all that. We start coming up through there, and this thunderhead came in and it started pouring rain. And it was one of those bursts, like you didn't really see it. The weather looked kind of okay, and by the time we got there, something had come in, and probably from the east, and it was coming down pretty good to the point you really couldn't really see too far off. And I remember we're kind of lined up and we're going up, and then we had to come up, and wherever the spot was, we had to kind of come up and ap it out. And you know, the rain, two things happen I've noticed when you're on a horse in the rain. Either you get tacky, everything's sticky, and you're usually miserable regardless later. I'm sure the horse isn't too happy either. But you either get tacky or everything gets so slick. And this was one of those cases where everything was so slick. And you're kind of getting that numbing kind of cold. You can't keep yourself warm. You're trying to switch hands and doing what you can, pull your hat down, and the water's dripping off of you. And I'm sure, like I said, I don't think the horse was probably very happy either. And we start working our way in, and we get into the spot. And I don't know where exactly, and I'd have to go back through and sometime on the trail kind of pick the spot. But I do remember we were coming up, and whatever it was, we came around and we were coming up, and it was a bit of a grade. And it could have been out further on in LaBarge, but I remember we're coming up, and the guy Rick was on the horse in front of me. So Rick's horse had been kind of jerking him around. I think there's some people that horses don't like, and then the people don't like horses, and that doesn't work very well. So he's been fighting this horse the whole time. It's kind of trying to wander off. It's pushing against, it's just, and everybody's yelling at him because he didn't know what he was doing. And I'm behind him, and he was going up, and he got about almost to the top, and I'm starting to come up behind him, and it's a grade, it's a pitched grade, and I think it was a little bit of an angle. but you couldn't quite see over the top. So you couldn't see once the guys kind of went up over, you couldn't see them. And I remember kind of coming up behind him and Rick started to come back in the saddle. And what he did was he started to grab the reins and it started to pull the horse and everything came more forward. And Rick, who was a decent sized guy, starts coming out of the saddle backwards. And I realize he's coming down at me because, of course, we're both kind of looking up at an angle like this. And I'm thinking I didn't think I was that close, but at that moment I realized because my horse is coming up and it's like water running down through the trail there. And, you know, the horse is just trying to the horse just basically wants to climb up and out of there. So, and I think if I would have been more experienced, I probably would have tried to pull off to the trail before that and get out of the way. But he starts pitching back. I'm kind of like, the horse I'm on decides it wants to go forward. I see Rick coming off and he's kind of coming back. So it's kind of more like he's falling into you. And I'm like, he's just coming back. So my horse decided to go off to the right. And of course, I want the horse to stay back on. And then I realize if I pull the reins and everything, my worry is the horse falling down. So Rick's horse is going up over the top. Rick's falling. He hits, I couldn't see him, but I'm sure he hit the ground in front of me. So I'm trying to go around and of course then I get dumped because I let go because I don't want to pitch that horse over because the horse is spooked and it wants to get out of the way because Rick's falling in front of him. So the horse was being far nicer to Rick than I was because as far as I was concerned, I would have went over Rick. And so I went back and I don't think Rick got hurt very, very much or anything, but I went back and then it was like that free fall where it takes like 10 minutes to land because one, I'm falling backwards and I'm also falling down. And I just remembered kind of thinking, man, I should have hit the ground by now. And then I hit the ground and it's just water and there was plenty of mud. And I hit the ground and I remember the first thing is looking up and I probably hit my head hard enough or whatever with the impact and all knocking the wind out of me because it did knock the wind out of me. I just remember looking up and not seeing any horses because my horse had went right up and over. And I didn't see Rick because he'd rolled off to the side because he was worried about the horse. And so I'm just laying there on the ground trying to figure where everybody went because I can't hear anything. My ears, you get sometimes when you get the wind knocked out of you, you get that muffled sound And I remember just laying there looking around trying to figure out where did everybody go. And then my horse had actually turned around and then looked back over. I saw it and then kind of everything comes back in. So at that point I was muddy, everything. We got in and by the time we got to Charlebois, everything is just soaked. On the trip in and everything we had was soaked. We're completely soaked. We got in, it lightened up and it was misty for a bit, I remember. But by the time we get into Charlebois, it's late afternoon, early evening, and we're trying to get all the gear on and everything had gotten wet, whoever had packed it, and where everything was packed in. This is the days we were still using at that point the old canvas tents. I remember this very clearly because everybody will know when you've been out all day, your boots or anything, the water gets in, how bad your socks smell. You get them wrinkled feet, and everything pasty. You lose all the color you have, and you got that dirty sweat socks smell. Well, that's what everything smelled like, and of course, canvas tents smell even worse than that. So everything just had a pungent odor. So everything smells. So we get in, pitch the tents, leave them up. I think we actually put some sternos inside the tents to try to get a little heat in there to dry them out because once the rain had stopped. And we ate, but there was no cheerfulness, nothing like, it was just kind of, we got here, we set up camp. Everybody's just, stomping around. It was just miserable. So it's almost kind of, I wasn't part of the deciding factor in this at all by any means. So I remember thinking, how long before these guys decide we're just going to go back? That's it, we're done. But they decided they wanted to stay the night. And so we went to bed down in our damp canvas tents, all shrinkled, which is what I think you call yourself at that point. You're all shrinkled and wet. We had some dry clothes. So you try to get your dry clothes on. You get in your sleeping bags. The sleeping bags were even damp. So by morning, we were all like living sweat socks, feet in wet sweat socks, because we got up the next morning and everybody feels damp. And I will never forget that morning because everyone's coming out. They're trying to get a fire going. They're trying to dry some clothes out, and everybody's coming out. And even though it was really cool, they're taking their clothes off and trying to get around the fire because everyone's trying to dry their body out, dry their clothes out, everything out. It's just simply miserable. So I can't remember really what everyone was doing. I think I just stuck around camp that entire day, because I was at that point where I just wanted to eat, and I really wanted to sleep because you couldn't sleep through it all night. It was just damp, cold, just smelled horrible. I mean, you're exhausted, but you can't sleep. And I remember going through that entire day and didn't accomplish anything. We didn't do anything. I know some of them wanted to go up Peters Mesa, and some people wanted to go here or there. And I think that's the other problem, is when you get in a trip like that, everybody starts kind of deciding, well, we were talking about doing this, and everybody started having a different idea of what they wanted to do. So the second night rolls around, and it was pretty much the meal, I think, was the same. I think it was stew both nights. So we're kicking on the stew. That age, I was starting to drink coffee, but I probably was drinking hot chocolate. You're just trying to stay warm. The evening then dries out, but it gets cool, very cool that night, and it was very breezy, and it just was just nasty. The tents didn't smell any better no matter what we had tried. Everything just smacked of just everything. Plus, everything you tried to do was mud from the day before, so now it's all just dry, clumpy mud, and your boots and everything. It was just nasty. So I remember that second night not getting much sleep yet again, because there was just no way to get comfortable. The sleeping bag still smelled. The sleeping bag at that point smells too. So the canvas tent smells, I smell, that smells. And you're not even at that point where you don't even smell yourself anymore. You just smell everything. So it's the odors, and people are cranky, they're miserable, they're not happy. And of course the horses wouldn't be happy. And I think whoever was dealing with the horses for the most part, because that was part of what I did that day in the camp. None of that was any good either. Everybody looks miserable. Everybody looks like kind of, let's just go, let's just leave. So we got to the second morning, and I remember it was everybody got up. Breakfast pretty much sucked. We were still having all the wood, everything was wet, so it was kind of a damp fire, and you never really get that kind of anything really going that second day. I think they had oatmeal and stuff, which just kind of makes you even feel more miserable on a cold day. And we kind of like ate and all that, and then someone at one point said, let's just start packing up and let's just get out of here. Let's just pull everything and pull everything and get everything out. And the problem is at that point was everybody was so miserable, it was like slow motion. It was packing everything up. The horses acted like they didn't care, like just leave us here, we could all die together in this spot. Nothing was like in any hurry to get out, to stay, to do anything. And being at that age, your patience is very thin, and you don't have much to do with yourself, because at that point, I was still kind of somewhat a piece of baggage. And I just remember, there was nothing happy about the moment. There was nothing joyous about the moment. And, that second, there was a little bright spot. We're going to go home. So all you're thinking about is, we get out of here, how many hours is it going to take us? Because once we get back, and how many hours before we get home? So before I can get a hot shower, because that's all you wanted at that point. You wanted a good hot meal, a hot shower. And this is back then, you get into Apache Junction, there was nothing there. So there was no food immediate either. So I remember getting the horses, and we went in and we started heading back out. And it was like nothing wanted to move. It was like, there are times I've left the mountains, and I know there's a couple trips that the weather's been bad, or you've just had a long day, and it takes a while to get out. And I think we never got over the first day achiness, kind of like stiff. I mean, I'm 14 years old, but I still felt achy, stiff. It was just like, it just sucked. And I remember us just going. And it's funny now looking back at it, but it was like, I think everybody wasn't talking to anybody else at that point. Everybody's just kind of trudging along. It makes me think of a movie. You see a movie where the guys are on the horses and it's just miserable weather and they got ponchos on and everything's pulled back and you hear nothing and it's just the thump, thump, thump of the horses. So we started getting back out, and Rick had been, there were, of course, everything's completely blown out of proportion at that time because the guy that's kind of whatever, who's an idiot or caused any kind of problem, he's like a focal point of everyone's hatred at that point and anger. So we're going out, and I got stuck behind Rick again. And I'd never seen such a thing as we were going down this one spot. And I don't know why or who or what, or if he was falling asleep or whatever, but I looked forward and all I could see was we were going down into this little bit of a downgrade. And he had slumped forward and ended up grabbing the horse around the neck and completely coming out of the saddle and then slipping around the horse's head and coming down in front of him on his feet. And I was just kind of like, what's he doing? Because it almost looked like he did it on purpose. And just sitting there pulling up, and you're just looking like, what is he doing? And then he just started walking his horse. He said, I'm done. I'm not going to ride. I think at that point, you're so chafed and riding in the saddle and everything's still damp. I think it was just, who knows, but he just decided, whatever reason, by circumstances, he came out of that saddle and ended up on his feet. He's just going to walk. So which slowed us down actually even a bit more, but I'm sure his horse was happy and I think Rick was happy, but then of course, then you're walking in your clothes, which are damp, and it's causing more chafing and whatnot. So we continued down, and I'll never forget, it was the longest from once we were going by Miner's Needle out to the horse trailer parking lot down at Peralta. That was the longest I think it's ever taken to get back there. I could tell you it was 8 hours because it literally was trudging. The sun was out, it was, fair day and the weather and stuff. But because we'd gotten off and on some light rains and stuff, but it was just literally miserable. You were so beaten down, you so didn't care anymore. And I remember getting in, and we got to the parking lot, and they started to bring stuff up, and of course I was kind of helping to load and unpack, and helping whoever had the horses and getting them in the trailers. And I remember doing that, which makes it even more miserable because there's people that just literally got to the parking lot, grabbed whatever their stuff was, said, I'll pick up my stuff from your place later, I don't worry about it. And they got in their truck or whatever, and they just left. So of whatever the group was, probably around a dozen people, or so, 14 people, there's only 4 or 5 people left. It's, and I remember just, well, my ride's here, I got to take this ride, so I don't got a choice, I got to help, which was the right thing to do. But I remember doing that. And then, of course, the truck I'm in doesn't have heat. Or much of heat. So it was just getting in an old cold pickup truck, and it didn't want to start, and then they had to get a jump, and then it had to get, and the horses are restless, and they wanted to get into town and all this. And of course, on the way back in, going down Old Apache Trail or going on Highway 60 back in, we got a flat tire on the trailer. So I had to pull over, and they didn't have a spare, so then we had to wait for that. So I think we rolled in, we got in late afternoon. I think it was like 11, 12 o'clock at night. I got dropped off, and I'll never forget that, my gear and stuff. And it was like that, and I'll never forget, my mom was like, so how'd it go? You guys got in late, was it a good trip? And just staring at her, One of the most miserable trips ever. And there's been ones, Randy Wright and I went in where we were all day in the rain, and we had a blast. I mean, the weather was totally just horrible. It was awful. It poured on us all day, but we had a great time. And we didn't talk a lot, but there was nothing negative about it. This was just one of those just blown negative trips. So I never went out with that particular group again either. I did go out with some of those people, but then if they ever organized anything like that again, it never happened that I know of. And if there's 3 or 4 of those people I did not really know, and I never saw again. So it literally was the best way to destroy a fellowship, because I think, nobody was in a good place at all. And that's kind of what happens sometimes. You have those trips. We just had one of those years where it's like no matter what you're going to do, there's no sun shining at that point. There's no silver lining. You just got to get through it, get back, and get out. It also made me, for quite some time after that, I was always a little bit hesitant on any time someone had a horse trip, because I remember that and all the responsibility that goes along with it. Because we weren't just like paying some guy to pack us in or wrangle us in, and it was a bunch of, so there's a lot of responsibility with that you have to take ownership of. And being that age, I just wanted to have fun. And that was not particularly fun, but I made it through it. I remember getting home and literally some of the clothes had that mildewy, stinky smell. Never got out of it. My boots were pretty much ruined at that point. It was just a miserable trip, and I will never forget it. It's not one I talk about much because there was nothing I learned from it other than some days you go out there and something throws something at you unexpectedly, and you're kind of at the mercy of the other people of what's going to happen. I need that person's horse. I need this. I wasn't. 4 or 5 years later, I probably would have grabbed my own gear and walked out if I had a car. But if you don't have a truck or car to get home, what are you going to do? So I was kind of in that situation that happened a lot during when I was younger, that sometimes where I would have walked out or just went and done my own thing and become independent to it, I couldn't really do it. So it was a rough one. It was a really tough one. So, and that had to be about 78, 79, because I know I wasn't smoking then. And I wasn't partaking in any of the alcohol or adult beverages at that point, if there were any, because I don't think anybody was sharing anything they had. But yeah, I'll never forget that. And the reason it stabs is I can still, of none of the rest of it, and there's little pieces of the memory, I can remember Rick, one, coming off the horse backwards at me, because I'll never forget that in the rain. Because it was just like literally, like he was such a clown and kind of had no control, but that happening. And then the second time, him slipping off that horse. I've never seen anyone except like in a movie do something like that. And what he did and how he ended up just walking, holding the horse, leading the horse. And it was like, okay, did he mean to do that? And never did ask him. I don't know whatever happened to him either, because I'd been out in the mountains. He'd been part of a couple groups at that point, and I kind of knew him relatively well, and then I never saw him, I don't think, after that. I think that was about the end of that. So, and I know his last name, but I always try to keep things a bit quiet, unless I'm talking to someone and say, hey, I'm going to tell this story. Is it all right if I drop your last name? And some people are cool with it, and some people may not be. So, but that was back 78, going in around Miner's Needle up to Charlebois Springs, and it was a very uneventful but kind of a painful lesson of just sometimes, and nowadays I would keep my head up and just say, hey, make the best of it, or leave the next day, because I would call that, or just turn around at some point and say, let's just get out of here, this is not our day. But yeah, we all made it out. There was no serious mishaps that anybody got physically hurt or anything, which was probably, back then, I don't think people even thought about it like that. We just kind of did what we did. And I cannot tell you the entire purpose of that trip. I was baggage at that point still in life. And there's pictures where I'll look at the picture and see myself, and I'll say, wow, okay, we're out there, we're in the Superstitions, we're cooking by a fire. And I couldn't tell you which trip it was or exactly what we were doing or what I was doing there or where we exactly, because it's just sort of like a gray area at that point. I was so young and so not in the need to know, I guess, on these trips. So, but that was a good trip, and pretty much I left that behind me and kind of moved further on, and had a lot of great experiences in the mountains, obviously, since then. One last thing as we wrap up tonight, there was just locally played The Mystery at Frog Springs Ranch on Discovery Channel, which was something I was pitched last January, right after Unexplained Unexplored ran, and while I was starting to work with Prometheus on Beyond Oak Island. And I passed on it. I watched it. I thought about talking about it a little bit at length here today, and I thought, nah, it's just a snippet, because watching it, and I will watch more further episodes, I'm not quite sure what they were looking for from me, because Frank and I talked about it, because Frank said, why do they want you in that? Why do they want to take you up into Idaho or Utah and do the program? And I said, I don't know. I posted on Facebook with the original message so everybody knows I'm not blowing no smoke. No, they wanted me. And I was kind of like, well, that's cool, but that was part of my discussions with them besides anything else was I didn't understand quite where I fit in. Now, program's fine. It kind of seems to be a mix of Gold Rush with Oak Island, with I'm not quite sure of what Skinwalker Ranch, and it's kind of mashed together. It seems to be more strictly about the family and their property and their experiences than bringing anyone outside in. Maybe in further episodes they'll bring some other people from the outside and it'll make more sense to me, but not saying I dodged a bullet, but I'm still kind of particularly not quite sure how I would have ever fit into that program, because I just don't see, because I was sitting there and saying, well, what would have I brought to the table? What would I be sitting there? What will we done? Were they going to like completely write something in, which I wouldn't be in favor of? So what was the purpose? And I'm sure by this point, them having moved along in it, they wouldn't have really a good idea why my name was there and why they wanted me to be in the show, why they really wanted me, and they were working on trying to get me in on it. So, but all the more kudos to those guys in Discovery and Cargus 7, because they were awesome people to work with. I really enjoyed working with them. Trevor worked with them as well. They were a good group of people. So good people, good production company. You know, they're not always in charge of that final edit, what might make the air, but I'm glad to see them out there and that program go out and run its piece. So everything else, and, you know, catch on any of the repeats of Beyond Oak Island on the Lost Dutchman stuff, because it's always good. And I know people are critical of, you know, it's funny because everyone's critical of the programs once they air, and we can have a lot to say about them. Holly Weird and how they did this and that. But the point is, if they're not there, then we're all asking, why aren't they doing any shows about this or that? And that's a big important piece of things. If we slam them enough, or if we don't want to watch them, we show no interest, then we don't get anything else. I don't know why they churn through them so fast, because it seems like everybody gets 5 or 6 episodes and they're done. 5 or 6 episodes, they're done. I don't know what the relation of moving forward, because the numbers on a lot of these shows are very similar. We did as well as Beyond Oak Island's doing or ever did, and a number of other shows. So I don't know if Beyond Oak Island was a test the waters or what it was, or if it'll even have something further past this season. So it's a bit odd, but always be supportive of these kind of programs, whether it's Gold Rush or all these different ones, because the moment we quit watching, then they just don't decide to put them out, and we get stuck with other formats or other type of story that we're probably even less interested in, and then we say, where did they go? Well, there's been a lot of shows on the wayside, and it can be because of the advertisers, but it can also be because of the criticism out there. So I'll be supportive of these guys and whatever they do, because for every one of them they're successful, there's going to be 2 or 3 more made and aired. So if you ever want your chance, the more positive and the more happy you are about it and supportive of everybody in it, the better chances there is for everybody else or us to get our real stories across down the line in the future. So that being said, I hope everybody's having a wonderful, great new year, staying high and dry, warm and cozy, all right? Stay safe, take care of yourselves, and we will catch you next time on Chasing Legends.